Welcome to Court Accountability Action Meets Legal AF. I've got Lisa Graves here, and I want to kind of just jump right in here, Lisa. We've got a huge United States Supreme Court case that's on the docket on an emergency track. It shows you when the Supreme Court wants to move quickly, it knows how to. Unlike the immunity decision or Colorado insurrectionist decision, here they set oral argument for the 10th of January, which is coming up, and then all sorts of briefing happened. Just to frame it here, the reason I say it has such major implications, it's because the dispute is whether the United States government, Congress, can force the sale of an asset held by the Chinese Communist Party, ultimately, through an entity of theirs that they control called ByteDance, which is known as TikTok, which is a social media platform which Americans use to amuse themselves, but the Chinese use to spy on us. I mean, there's no other way to put this. I mean, you think you're watching TikTok, they're watching you. And it is a threat to our national security. Let's just put the shoe on the other foot. Could you imagine the Chinese government or the Russian government allowing an American social media platform owned by the American government that obviously was being used in part as a Trojan horse to spy on the country to be allowed? No, I'll answer it. It was rhetorical. No. So we shouldn't either. And there's a lot of laws that have been proposed, and some on the books, that limit foreign investment in our companies, and particularly those of our enemies, China, Russia, Iran, and the like. And so you have TikTok being used primarily by the Chinese government, but also by the Iranians, including they're an equal opportunity troller. Any country can use TikTok if their goal is to undermine American national foreign policy interest and security. And so the Congress got together and acted. And, John Roberts on the Supreme Court loves to talk about the separation of powers. And the law of Congress is the law of the land. Well, they passed the law and Joe Biden signed it, which forced the sale of TikTok from Chinese ownership to non-Chinese ownership in order to stay. TikTok didn't like it, claimed to have, some sort of First Amendment rights or the First Amendment rights of its users. And the Biden, the Solicitor General, and on behalf of the United States of America said, no, there's national security interests that are in play here, that there is no constitutional precept being violated, and no, they should be forced to sell it. So we've got that as the framing for what's going to go on in an oral argument on the 10th of January. And of course, Donald Trump couldn't help himself. So why don't you walk through what Donald Trump did and what do you think about it? And what do you think the court's going to do about the new brief that Donald Trump, in his own name, just had filed for him?
Well, that was a really great description, Michael, of what's at stake and what's going on behind this case. The other part of that story is that Donald Trump had been critical of TikTok until he met with another billionaire named Jeff Yass, who's the richest man in Pennsylvania, and whose wealth is substantially derived from an investment way back when in ByteDance, which owns or controls TikTok. And after that meeting at Mar-a-Lago with a billionaire who's invested in, whose wealth is tied to TikTok, Donald Trump changed his opinion or his political position on TikTok. And Jeff Yass is a person who in recent years has dominated the Republican Party and to groups trying to put the Republican Party into power, in addition to trying to capture the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And so, the backstory here is one also of corruption of Donald Trump, of meeting with a billionaire and basically trying to change American policy to suit what Donald Trump wants to do in light of an apparent request of a person who has deep financial ties to TikTok. That's not to say that that Jeff Yass is involved in Chinese spying. He's just involved in the company that is controlled by the Chinese government that is using this platform in order to harvest information, gather information about Americans.
And one last thing before I just turn off my mic completely. And the ByteDance chairperson went to Mar-a-Lago then after the election, and they must have had. It must have been. I don't know if you've been in New York before and try to go to Katz's Delicatessen, but I
Yes.
pictured Mar-a-Lago like the line to get a pastrami
Yes.
sandwich at Katz's with right. Take a number.
Yes.
The line
Yes.
of tech oligarchs and billionaires waiting in line to kiss Donald Trump's what anatomical part included the ByteDance guy.
Yes. Yes,
Right.
that's exactly right. And so you have a situation where the one of the key U.S. investors, who's very influential in Republican politics, in essence, went to Mar-a-Lago, and you know, correlation causation. The next thing you know, Donald Trump has a different view on TikTok, and then, as you said, along with these other people looking to kiss up to Trump or win his favor, ByteDance also is standing in the line to get the chance to have Donald Trump in his very transactional way do what they want, notwithstanding the national security testimony in support for this legislation before Congress that was signed into law. And then we come to the present moment, or near the present moment where you began, Michael, which is so the case is taken up by the Supreme Court on this challenge, a First Amendment challenge that TikTok ByteDance are pursuing, and then you have this extraordinary, just in a way, a really gross, arrogant intervention by Trump, who's not even president yet, to basically urge the court to not let that law go into effect because it's going to, quote, hurt his, or at least in the public telling of it, hurt his negotiation, whatever that means, to resolve this thing. I mean, the Supreme Court, as out of control as it's been in many, many ways, this is another extraordinary sort of effort by Trump to basically make not con law, but Trump law, to basically bend the court to his will in having it not basically consider this case until he can get into office where he has the power as president to basically do whatever, or do near what he wants. Although he can't veto that law, he could try to get his Republicans in the House and the Senate to repeal it, and then he could sign that repeal into law, or he could try some other method of non-enforcement of it. But it's sort of outlandish for an incoming president who's not president yet to submit a brief like this, trying to get the court to do what he wants, and to do what he wants on a political basis so that he can supposedly negotiate better, when it already seems that he's given away the store.
I'm just reading, getting ready to kind of put this video together. Here is from the CSIC, right? About our intelligence and security. This is how they describe it. They said there's 3 potential sources of danger by TikTok. The first is that TikTok is part of a nefarious Chinese government influence operation designed to sway U.S. politics. So you just thought it was a place to get recipes and learn a new dance, but that's not really what it is. The second is that TikTok can be used to collect personal data on Americans. The third is that voluntarily downloading TikTok onto your phone or device allows for the injection of malicious software by China. Right? Those are 3 really bad risks.
Well, that's right. And my understanding from staff in both the executive branch and the legislative branch is that they're not allowed to have TikTok on their phone because of those dangers. So government employees have been instructed, before this law was passed, to not have that app because of the risks that it poses to the data that's on people's phones. Now, we don't know entirely the scope, of all of that or how that could be used. And obviously, there's a whole broad set of risks from all social media in terms of the type of information they gather when they, you click it and you sign up on their privacy policy, whatever that may be, a non-privacy privacy policy. So there are wide threats. But in this instance, you have a particular application that's not controlled entirely by a purely private party, but by a government that has engaged in substantial spying, both on its own citizens and people abroad. I remember about 20 years ago, when I was working on national security issues for the ACLU, we had a privacy lobbyist who was studying at that time, so circa 2005, what China was doing to its citizens. And it turned out that China was putting up these big TV screens in cities so that people could watch the games, a soccer game, for example, on the screen. But the TVs were spying on the people watching it, doing facial recognition technology on who's like. And so this is not a government that has not engaged in authoritarian or really intrusive behavior toward its own citizens, I'm sure it doesn't have any qualms about the American people who aren't its citizens.
I
And
thought
so these are legitimate issues that have been raised by public officials, by security, national security experts that Congress listened to, and on a bipartisan basis decided that there needed to be divestment in order to increase protection for the rights of the American people.
we just had the Chinese and the Iranians hack Donald Trump's and JD Vance's phone and live inside of 9 different mobile phone carriers for over the last year, looking at everybody in America's communications, and they just hacked the Treasury Department's workstations. The Chinese in advance, getting ready, cracking their knuckles, getting ready for the Trump administration, which is sloppy, which is not disciplined, which they're going to exploit. I had somebody tell me recently, I like when Trump's in office because his erratic behavior makes us safer. I said, okay, that is not a doctrine. And that
No.
is not what happens. They see erratic behavior and an undisciplined mind as being a weakness, not a strength. And they try to take
Right.
advantage of it. I'm talking about our enemies because they're
Well, that's
not
right.
disciplined.
Right. They're very disciplined. And in fact, the other part of that lack of discipline is this notion of putting people into positions of power in all of these agencies who aren't properly cleared by the FBI, who do not have proper security clearances for the part of the time that Trump was trying to bypass using the FBI background investigation. We know that in the first Trump administration, they rebuffed efforts by national security officials to deny Jared Kushner access to cleared information because of concerns about his background. And so you have an incoming administration that will, by design, be filled with people who are chosen for their loyalty to Trump, not due to their expertise, their devotion to following rules. They may not even be cleared properly to have the positions of trust that they have. And so it's a situation that's rife for potential exploitation by a sophisticated foreign enemy.
Well, Musk is not going to get cleared by normal channels for national security. They think he
No.
is already in bed with the Chinese. They already said besides the fact he's the only American car manufacturer that has a plant in China for his
Yep.
Tesla and for his batteries. The national intelligence community and the FBI has already said they're having problems with Musk and clearing him,
Well, and
but that
also with
doesn't matter.
Russia, with his relationship with Putin, without
Right. And
having, yeah,
so
yeah.
Trump is going to just wave a magic wand and give him a national security clearance when he would never get it under any other circumstances. So let's just turn for the last part of this hot take into this amicus brief. So, friends of a court brief get filed. You guys are working on one, I think, right now in another matter. And if the court finds it helpful and finds, scholars will write them or elected officials will have them written for them, taking positions that are important to the public concern and file. I get it. And sometimes the court accepts them and sometimes the court rejects them. It's not an automatic right to either file one or to have one accepted. Donald Trump decided he wanted to weigh in on the TikTok thing, even though his administration isn't yet in power. And he wanted to let them know in the filing, written by John Sauer, who writes some incredibly he just writes some incredibly stupid things that I've seen him write, like asking the attorney general in New York to throw away the $450 million judgment because Donald Trump's all about peace and love, and Abraham Lincoln would want that. I mean, the stuff that they write is just incredible. I mean, as a solicitor general, I can't wait to hear the arguments he's going to be making in front of this court and how Amy Coney Barrett is going to react to them. Like, because he comes off as not stable in my mind. I'm
Well,
talking about John Sauer.
He's the new Michael Cohen, in his own, without having any, recanting of the thing,
Right.
because he's just willing to say whatever, Trump
He
once
will.
said. And that, like, to have that person be Solicitor General, is really astounding, not because they've all been great Solicitor Generals. Ken Starr was a Solicitor General. It's not like they're all, great men or women, but in general, in recent history, the Solicitor General has been perceived as a fair dealer, in essence, with the court. That's why the Solicitor General is called the 10th Justice sometimes, because they're seen as representing not just the position of the United States government, but a credible position. And now you have a guy who was arguing that SEAL Team 6 could take an order from Trump and execute arrival of Donald Trump, and that would be constitutional under this so-called official acts, as long as the president ordered it to be so. That's the guy who is incoming as Solicitor General. He's also a guy who, when he was a state AG and Solicitor General for a state, was defending a state's monitoring of women's periods and miscarriages. So, he's an anti-abortion, sort of pro-authoritarian, in my view, activist who is now going to be in this top position arguing these cases. But even before he's in that post, here he is submitting a brief. And as you mentioned, basically anyone who can afford to submit an amicus brief basically can, because they've changed the rules that used to require the other parties to accept whether you can submit an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief. So there was nothing barring him from doing so. But I still think it was incredibly arrogant to do so, because Trump isn't president yet. When he is sworn in as president, he'll have a chance to try to weigh in on the case.
And there's no law in it. There's no law in it. It just says, I'm a deal maker. Haven't you read my book? I'm going to cut a deal, maybe with Truth Social, my own company.
It's I don't know if we've ever seen a brief quite like that in the whole history of amicus briefs. Ann Sauer was more than willing to do it. Like you said, the same type of activity with the New York courts in terms of what arguments he'll make in order to please his client, Donald Trump. There's just seems to be, not the usual bounds of the claims that are made. But in this instance, I do think, like, just the arrogance of this idea that the Supreme Court should not consider or not, in essence, allow a federal law duly enacted, duly, signed into law to go into effect because a person who's not yet president wants to cut a deal on it.
Right.
It's just vile in a way.
If he's got the numbers, then let his new 119th Congress fix it. But if he doesn't, which he obviously doesn't, that majority, I just did a hot take on it, with Representative Granger missing in action, I think that majority is down to one. And if they lose one, and they've already had one person announce they're not going to support the speaker, they're not going to get much done in the first several months. And I got a sore spot for this kind of stuff, because I was fortunate enough in my career to have learned my constitutional law and studied my constitutional law at my law school from someone who several years later, only about 5 years later, became the Solicitor General for Clinton, the late Walter Dellinger. So I learned under Van Alstyne and Walter Dellinger my con law. We spent 8 weeks on Marbury versus Madison and nothing else. Right? I had to learn some of the other constitutional law from bar review courses when I was taking the bar.
Marbury.
Because Walter Dellinger loved, and he was right, loved everything about Marbury versus Madison. And so somebody who's going to be this joker, who's going to, like you said, say anything that Donald Trump wants him to say, or take any position without regard to legitimacy, is just mind-boggling. But we're gonna hold their feet to the fire. You, me, Alex Aronson, all the other contributors here on Legal AF and on Court Accountability Action. That's our reason for being, right? That is why we are here. It's now my full-time job. So this is it, man. Yeah. And I'm going to be talking to Lisa Graves about doing some other amazing things with her, particularly in 2025. So we're at the end of the Legal AF Court Accountability, Lisa and Michael show about what is happening at the TikTok level with Donald Trump and John Sauer. We will pick it up again after we get a chance to listen to the oral argument on the 10th of January. It's going to be interesting. We did another hot take with your partner, Alex, about the end of the year report for Chief Justice Roberts, and he had a couple of choice words to say about foreign interference in our system, our body politic. I want to see how that plays out when he starts asking questions during bite dances, the Communist Chinese Party's lawyers that are going to be representing them talking about, it's not our First Amendment rights. It's the First Amendment rights of 140 million Americans that have the right to have our national security undermined, apparently, is apparently the argument. So it'll be fun. We'll listen. We'll come back. We'll report here on Legal AF. Take a minute, hit the subscribe button for Legal AF and help us build. We're up to over 380,000 subscribers in just 3 months. Crazy. You guys were there when it was like 25,000. And now we're looking at, our goal is 500,000 first quarter of 2025. And we're going to get there with your help in our audience. So I really appreciate everybody here. Until our next hot take, Michael Popak and Lisa Graves. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.